DHS has argued that agents still identify themselves while masked. When our heroic law enforcement officers conduct operations, they clearly identify themselves as law enforcement while wearing masks to protect themselves from being targeted by highly sophisticated gangs like Tren de Agua and MS-13 criminal rings. Okay, they've always had criminal rings. They've always had the mafia. They've always had gangs in the United States. They've always had the Crips and the Bloods. They've always had criminal gangs. They've never worn masks. Hey, I'm here with Nick Cruse from the Revolutionary Blackout Network, and I've talked about this in the past where you see ICE agents dressed like this with masks on, and often they don't have their name. That's unusual for them to have their name. They don't, so they'll show up with a face mask on, no badge, no nothing. And I always said, well, this would be perfect if you're a criminal. You could just put a mask on, say you're ICE, and then start kidnapping people. You could commit all kinds of crimes. Well, it turns out that's actually happening. I said this. You can't have cops, and they're saying, well, they're going to dox those cops. Hey, there's been cops in the United States for 400 years. They've always had to wear their name tag. They always had to have a badge number, and they also always had to show their face. Somehow they made it. But all of a sudden, in 2025, cops have to start covering their face because they're afraid of being doxxed. Well, then quit. Because you don't get to police the United States in a mask undercover, and we don't know who you are. And why? Because the FBI warns of criminals posing as ICE. That's what they're doing. Urges agents to ID themselves. Really, the FBI is telling the ICE to ID. Criminals posing as U.S. immigration officers have carried out robberies, kidnappings, sexual assaults in several states, warns the enforcement bulletin issued last month by the FBI. The Bureau urges agencies to ensure officers clearly identify themselves and to cooperate when civilians ask to verify an officer's identity, including by allowing calls to local police precincts. Ensure law enforcement personnel adequately identify themselves during operations and cooperate with individuals who request further verification. That's what the FBI is saying. The bulletin cites 5 2025 incidents involving fake immigration officers and says criminals are using immigration and customs enforcement's heightened profile to target vulnerable communities, making it harder for Americans to distinguish between lawful officers and imposters while eroding trust in law enforcement. I said this. This is what we've been saying since day one. A review of public reporting confirms 4 or 5 cases described in the bulletin. One appears to have gone unreported, suggesting the FBI drew in part on internal law enforcement information. On August 7th, according to the FBI, 3 men in black vests entered a New York restaurant claiming to be ICE agents. Inside, they tied workers' hands and pulled a garbage bag over the person's head. Another, believing the burglar's story, surrendered themselves, only to be kicked to the ground and tied up as the intruders robbed their ATM. The Bureau's advisory urges agencies at every level of government to coordinate to verify legitimate versus non-legitimate operations attributed to ICE, a call that frames the wave of impersonations as a national law enforcement concern. The FBI has declined comment. Its national press office said that it could only respond to media inquiries involving national security, violations of federal law, or essential public safety functions during the government shutdown. Cases cited by its advisory span kidnappings, street crime, sexual violence. In Florida, the advisor says a woman unzipped her jacket and revealed a shirt that said ICE and told her ex-boyfriend's wife she was there to pick her up before driving her to an apartment complex. The woman later escaped. In Brooklyn, it alleges a man told a woman he was an immigration officer and directed her to a nearby stairwell where he punched her, tried to rape her, and stole her phone before police caught him. In Raleigh, North Carolina, a man entered a motel room and threatened to deport a woman if she did not have sex with him. telling her he was a sworn officer. He showed her a business card with a badge. The FBI describes a few signs of impersonation: forged or mismatched credentials, outdated protective gear, and clone vehicle markings. It's urging agencies to launch outreach programs aimed at identifying fake ICE agents, a step the FBI argues could counteract the mistrust caused by impersonators and strengthen law enforcement's image. Federal rules require immigration officers to identify themselves and state the reason for the arrest as soon as it is practical and safe to do so. The standard has not changed since it was codified in the 90s, yet advocates say it is increasingly ignored. The recent increased presence of armed masked federal officers completely disrupts and erodes public trust in law enforcement, said a Texas Civil Rights Project. Further, the increase in local cooperation with federal authorities through 287 agreements has led to chilling effect on local law enforcement for communities, referring to a program that deputizes local police to act as immigration agents. When masked federal agents conceal their identity and authority as a practice, anyone can don a mask and a gun and not be expected or required to verify their authority. The growing use of such unmarked officers has raised questions for months about accountability and transparency in federal policing. However, the Trump administration frames ICE mask use as an officer safety measure, best left to the discretion of its field officers. At a recent press briefing, Department of Homeland Security Kristi Noem said they wear masks at times to protect their identities from dangerous situations. The leadership teams, we leave that up to them. So that's not okay. Cops don't get to decide whether they want to wear a mask and act like a criminal. They don't get to do. If you're a cop, you got to show your face, you got to show your badge and your name. That's what you get. That's what you have to do to be a cop. DHS has argued that agents still identify themselves while masked. When our heroic law enforcement officers conduct operations, they clearly identify themselves as law enforcement while wearing masks to protect themselves from being targeted by highly sophisticated gangs like Tren de Agua and MS-13 criminal rings. Okay, they've always had criminal rings. They've always had the mafia. They've always had gangs in the United States. They've always had the Crips and the Bloods. They've always had criminal gangs. They've never worn masks. They've never. So this is all bullshit. ICE acting director Todd Lyons echoed the safety rationale, telling Face the Nation this summer that while he's not proponent of masks, he would allow them if that's a tool that the men and women of ICE choose to use to protect themselves and their family. F off. Critics say the policy blurs the line between lawful arrest and military-style force. They argue that officers who hide their faces and affiliation weaken public confidence and make it harder to tell a legitimate operation from violent criminals. The Boston Regional Intelligence Center issued a public advisory last December, which Wired obtained via public record request, warning of a potential increase in scams related to news about the mass deportations from the incoming administration. The notice references an incident from Trump's first term in which four men in ICE apparel reportedly robbed a man on the street in Queens, demanding he pay money to avoid arrest. Scammers know the immigration process is complicated and will use confusion along with fear to take advantage of victims. That's what it said in the bulletin. In September, according to documents obtained via public record request, the Boston police. Okay, we already did this. Okay. The FBI says ICE's enhanced public profile and the media's coverage around it offers criminals the perfect pretext to prey on vulnerable communities. Legal experts say that images of militarized mass enforcement are not just being copied by criminals, but encouraged by policy itself. All right, so you get it. All right, you get it. You get it. Federal officers must be prepared to prove who they are and accept that public skepticism is a reasonable response, not a threat. The Boston Advisory warned of other schemes preying on immigrants, from fake visa lotteries and sham. So there's lots of stuff. For decades, agencies like ICE and CBP have evaded meaningful oversight and operated with a culture of secrecy and abuse under both Republican and Democrat leadership. The increased prevalence of mass agents only compounds the culture of impunity. Yep, okay. News reports of ICE agents frightening and threatening U.S. residents are widespread and occur almost daily. In Massachusetts, video shows federal agents detaining an adult and leaving a 13-year-old boy standing alone on a city sidewalk. Neighborhood volunteers and local officers later helped him get home. In nearby Chelsea, the same week, agents smashed an SUV window and dragged a man to the pavement in front of his family after church on Mother's Day. In Oregon, in October, footage of local news showed masked agents breaking down a bedroom door during a Gresham apartment raid, weapons drawn as baby cries in the background. Then on Monday, ICE agents in Ontario, California, shot a U.S. citizen from behind during a traffic stop, their second Southern California shooting in a week. It's rich that the FBI thinks ICE has a PR problem in immigrant communities because of impersonators, while masked and militarized ICE agents are waging a daily campaign of terror against those very communities. So there you go. So what do you have to say about this, Nick? Did you predict this?
Yeah, this is a wild story, and this is just another example of how police states don't really make us safe.
Right.
Like we're spending a record amount of money on giant police budgets, record money on ICE budgets, and people still say they don't feel safe. They still say impose. Americans still feel extremely unsafe despite what we are spending because it's not the way you actually address the problem of public safety. And can you imagine what the neocon propagandists would be saying if you had secret police essentially running and with masked men kidnapping people in Venezuela? Can you imagine if this was Iran, if this was China, if this was Russia, what they would say about the Putin regime? If you had what is happening in the United States, which is why Democrats and liberals annoy me. People who follow me, you guys know how much I can't stand liberals because they'll say stuff like, I can't believe this is happening to us in America. What are we, North Korea? You guys see them say that all the time. Like, no, this is America. This is what we do in the United States. Everything that they project to their enemies is what we have back at home. And if you're wondering why there's so much violence like this, you have people pretending to be ICE agents. Like, I need Americans to start thinking critically about the society that they created. Do you guys think it's a coincidence that the most violent empire in modern human history just so happened to be one of the most violently domestically? One that is responsible for mass murders and genocide all around the world. Do you guys think it's a coincidence that we have school shootings, that we have people who pretend to be ICE agents? This is what I think is the societal poison of imperialism. Not only does it comes home, you send a message to the population that if you have a problem, violence should be the first solution to your problems because the ruling class solves all their problems with violence. If the people are protesting against the government instead of addressing the problems of the people, they immediately tear gas them and shoot them with rubber bullets. You guys see how the ruling class always relies on violence. They always relies on violent institutions. I don't think it's a coincidence that that leads to a violent society where people are doing stuff like this. I don't think it's a coincidence that you have China, a country who haven't invaded anyone in decades, who don't engage in war, that has a non-violent society. You guys see how those things kind of translate? You see why the UK is an extremely violent society when they export violence everywhere throughout the globe. I think these things are connected. And I think Americans need to have a deep reflection on how we run our society and our culture and our values and our way we address public safety if we're going to move forward as a country.
Do you really think that having the world's biggest prison population makes our country safer? Do you really think that taking men out of the home and leaving children without fathers and parents, you think that makes us a safer society? Do you really think that enforcing these archaic drug laws makes us, as you know, of course it doesn't get enforced against people like Hunter Biden, but it gets enforced by poor people on the street every day. And because there's lots of money in the prison industrial complex. And now Trump wants $85 billion more to build more prisons for ICE. What that means is that we're in the end stage of capitalism, right? Which means that the rich and poor divide is getting too big for people to ignore, and they're going to have a revolution. So you got to ramp up the police state and the prisons. And that's exactly what's happening, because end stage capitalism always resorts to fascism to keep their scam going. that's exactly. I know this is this isn't hard to understand unless you don't want to understand it. Come see us in Australia. Second show's added in Melbourne, Sydney, and Brisbane. We'll see you in Burbank, California, the day after Thanksgiving. It's a Friday, and then Pottstown, Pennsylvania, December 6th. Plus, January 11th, we're going to be in Waikiki at the Blue Note. Tickets not available yet for them, but go to jimmydore.com for a link for all the other tickets.